Welcome to Dark Verse. I'm Isaac Nightshade. This is the dark side of Spooner Street. 20 original Family Guy horror stories you were never meant to hear. In this world, Peter's laugh becomes a plague. Lois rewrites reality in her dreams. Stewie opens doors that should never exist. And Meg? Well, Meg was never missing. She was erased. These aren't just spooky rewrites. They're fractures, echoes, versions of Quahog that slipped through the cracks and crawled into the wrong reality. Behind the jokes, behind the cutaway gags, there's something darker, and tonight we're going to open it. So dim the lights, turn down the volume, and don't blink when the screen flickers, because once you step into the dark side of Spooner Street, you'll never see your favorite characters the same way again. Story 1, The Peter Paradox. There is a version of Peter Griffin who is not alive, and yet he never dies. He exists somewhere beneath the surface of the show, behind the laughter, the cutaway gags, the loops. He remembers everything because he is the original. In the earliest timeline, Peter Griffin was real, not real like flesh and blood, but real enough to feel pain, to love, to suffer. He lived a simple life in Quahog, wife, kids, friends. But one day something changed. He slipped, not on a floor or a joke, but between timelines. The world flickered around him. Jokes replayed. His own voice echoed with delay. The laugh track came early, before the punchline. He looked at Lois and realized she was saying the same thing she'd said the day before. Word for word. Same smile, same blink, same movement. Then it happened again. And again. He began waking up in the same day, over and over, not just in life, but in syndication. Reruns, looping versions of his life broadcast across dimensions, watched by millions who didn't know he could feel it. And one night, Peter didn't wake up in Quahog. He woke up in a white room, no ceiling, no floor, just brightness and sound. He saw himself, hundreds of versions, thin Peters, fat Peters, old Peters, CGI Peters, pencil sketches, 3D renderings, all in stasis, all watching him. He was surrounded by clones, not physical ones, narrative ones, each created to reboot the show, each edited for tone, audience, time slot. He wasn't Peter anymore. He was just the first draft, discarded, but still aware, trapped in the buffer of broken episodes that never aired, in rejected scripts, in demo reels with no laugh track. He screamed. But the audio was muted. He tried to move, but the animation had stopped. Time passed, or didn't. There was no difference. Eventually, he was pulled back into an active timeline. Not his own, but a newer version. He looked around. Everything felt slightly off. Stewie's voice was higher. Lois blinked too much, and he wasn't hungry anymore. Because he wasn't controlling the body. He was watching it. Someone else was running the Peter model now. A newer rendering. He was just along for the ride. And it kept happening, over and over. Each time the show rebooted, relaunched, reimagined, he was there, just behind the eyes, screaming in silence. He watched Peter laugh, dance, get hurt, explode, and always reset. Eventually, the original Peter stopped trying to escape. He started listening to the gaps between episodes, to the glitches and transitions, to the data underneath the jokes. There was something else in there, a whisper, a voice calling to him, not from the show, but from outside it. A place beyond timelines, beyond rewrites. A void where discarded characters drift, half-rendered, forgotten, but not gone. They called it the static field, and now he's trying to get back there, to break free of the reruns, to pull himself through the screen, because the original Peter Griffin doesn't want to be funny anymore. He wants to be real again. And if you ever feel like you've seen the same Family Guy episode twice in one day, not just similar, but exact, down to every frame, he might be testing the signal. And if the screen flickers, if his eyes stay on you a second too long, you're not watching the show. The show is watching you. Story 2. Stewie's final blueprint. Every genius has a final plan. For Stewie Griffin, it began as an idea scribbled in crayon. A machine that could free him, not just from his crib or from his family, but from existence itself. He called it the ladder. Not a ladder you climb, but one you shed. Each rung was a part of him, his flesh, his thoughts, his past. The ladder would allow him to evolve, not in body, but in mind. To step beyond identity, memory, even language. Stewie worked in secret. No blueprint, no wires. The machine was built from concepts, trauma, ego, ambition, and all the unspeakable things he never admitted he wanted. He activated it on a quiet Tuesday. No flash, no bang, just a moment of stillness. And then he changed. The first layer fell away. His body. No more voice. No more hunger. No more pain. Then came memory. He forgot his name. Forgot Lois. Forgot Brian. But something deeper remained. An awareness. Stewie had entered a state beyond self, drifting in a mental space he had designed, but now could no longer control. Because as he climbed the ladder, each part of him he discarded began to take form. Every broken thought, every rage-filled tantrum, every repressed fear, they became versions of Stewie, not clones, not echoes, entities, some still babies, others monstrous, some with no eyes, others with too many, and they were all trapped inside the blueprint. It hadn't erased them, it had stored them. A mental vault brimming with unstable variants. The real Stewie, or what remained of him, watched as they tore at each other, fought for control, laughed with mouths that didn't open, and then one of them turned. It looked at him, the part he had hidden deepest, the one he thought he had buried before he ever spoke his first word. It smiled and whispered something back into the system. Stewie fell. Hard, not through space, not through time, but through self. Down the ladder in reverse. Each rung cut him as he returned. Each memory reattached like rusted metal. Every fear screamed back into his skull. He woke up in his crib, screaming. Lois rushed in. Everything looked normal, but Stewie knew. He hadn't come back alone. Now every time he blinks, he sees the others, watching from the shadows of mirrors, floating just behind his thoughts, finishing his sentences before he knows the ladder is still open, somewhere deep inside him, and the versions he left behind, they want out. Some say you can hear them if you listen to Stewie talk in his sleep, not his usual monologues, something older, broken, a chorus of versions calling upward. And if one day he looks at you and says something he's never said before, you may not be talking to Stewie at all. You may be talking to the last thing he climbed away from. Story 3, Lois in the House That Eats Memories. There are places that forget you, and then there are places that make you forget. It began with a name. Lois sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Peter to come home. She couldn't remember what he looked like. Not his face, not his voice, not even his laugh. She stood up, confused. The fridge had photos of him, family pictures, vacation shots, but the man in them looked wrong, too sharp, too still, like someone was pretending to be him. She asked Chris. He said, "Dad's in the garage." But when she opened the garage door, there was no one there, just dust, boxes she didn't recognize, and a long, wet footprint leading back into the house. Later, when Lois asked Brian if Peter had left town, the dog looked at her like he didn't understand the question. "Who's Peter?" That night, she looked through every family photo album. Every frame had 5 people, but Peter's face was always blurred, smudged with age, or caught mid-blink, or missing altogether. She confronted Stewie. He shrugged, said she was tired, said she needed sleep. But when she checked his lab that night, she found something under a sheet in the corner. A mirror, old, cracked, covered in wires and blinking lights. She lifted the sheet. The reflection didn't show her. It showed the house, moving, walls bending, hallways stretching, rooms rearranging when no one looked. The house wasn't alive. It wasn't conscious. It was hungry. Lois finally understood. It wasn't that Peter had disappeared. It was that the house had devoured him. Not physically, not with teeth, with forgetting. Piece by piece, it swallowed memory. Names, voices, connections, until even grief disappeared, and it wasn't finished. Because the next morning, Meg was gone. Her room was still there, her bed made, her perfume in the air. But no one remembered her, not even Chris. Lois did, at least, for now. She began writing everything down. Names, dates, faces. She pinned them to the walls. She wrote them on mirrors. She tattooed them into her skin because the house was getting stronger, faster. Every time she blinked, it took more. The phone rang. She didn't remember owning a phone. Voices called her name in the vents. Pictures rearranged themselves at night. And now she couldn't remember what her own voice sounded like. She tried to leave. The front door opened into the attic. The windows showed other houses, on fire, flooded, empty. The TV only played old episodes of her life, episodes she didn't remember filming. But she was in them, always smiling, always static. One night, Lois opened the closet in her bedroom and found a hallway she didn't build. Inside were doors, dozens of them, each labeled with a name, some familiar, some forgotten. She opened the one that said Peter. Inside was a room made of echo, a chair, a photo, and a voice, whispering her name like it was a song. She sat down, closed her eyes, and listened. The next morning, the house was quiet, still, but the kitchen had only 3 chairs. The photos had only 3 people. And when Brian barked for breakfast, he didn't know why he felt so sad. Somewhere beneath the floors, the house swelled, satisfied, because Lois was home now, and it was almost full. Story 4, Quagmire's Guest Room. There's a room in Glenn Quagmire's house no one talks about, not because it's forbidden, but because it's always empty. Quagmire never brings it up, never shows it off, never lets anyone in. He calls it the guest room, casually, like it's just another part of the house, but he never has guests. Not overnight, not anymore. Years ago, before the house was remodeled, neighbors remembered hearing noises from that room. Not music, not conversation, just movement. A chair scraping the floor, soft pacing, muffled breathing. Even when Quagmire wasn't home, he always laughed it off, blamed it on plumbing, or old floorboards, or once a raccoon in the walls. But then people started disappearing, not from the town, from him, dates, visitors, strangers he met at bars. They'd come home with him and never leave. Police never found evidence. His house was always spotless. His alibis were perfect, and the guest room was always empty, until one night Peter came over drunk and accidentally opened the wrong door. He thought it was a bathroom. Instead, he found a room that didn't match the house. The wallpaper peeled in patterns that looked like faces. The floor dipped in the center, like something had been pacing there for years. There were photos on the wall, blurry, black and white. Every photo was of a person asleep, but none of them were familiar, and every one of them had eyes scratched out. Peter laughed, said Quagmire had weird tastes. He left. He forgot. But the next morning there was a new photo on the wall of Peter, sleeping, eyes untouched. And Quagmire, he just smiled. There are rumors now that the room isn't a room, that it's older than the house, that it was there before Quagmire ever moved in. Some believe it's alive, a space that feeds on stillness, that it waits for someone to lie down. And once they do, it keeps them, not physically, not in chains, but in place, forever dreaming, forever repeating. Quagmire doesn't sleep in his own bed anymore. He sleeps in the hallway next to the guest room, one eye open, listening. Because the room doesn't just take visitors. Sometimes it opens on its own. Neighbors say they've seen a light flick on inside, a shape pass by the window, but Quagmire hasn't had anyone over in months. And when asked about the room now, he just mutters, I didn't build it. Some nights, if you walk past the house around 3 a.m., you might see the door slightly ajar. Not wide, just enough. And if you step inside, the room will know your name. It always does. And it will show you a bed, clean sheets, soft pillow, perfectly made. All it asks is that you rest. Just for a moment. Just until morning. But morning never comes in the guest room. Only stillness. Only silence. Only the next photo on the wall. Story 5. Brian's ninth life. Brian Griffin has died before. Hit by a car. Laid to rest. Mourned by his family. And yet, he's here. Alive. Talking. Drinking. Just like nothing ever happened. But something did. And it's still happening. Brian doesn't remember the moment of impact. Just the sound. Crushed metal. Lois screaming. Then silence. Then waking up in his bed. Everything normal, except it wasn't. The food didn't taste right. The light felt too bright. The air too still. And when he looked in the mirror for a split second, the reflection didn't blink when he did. At first he thought it was trauma, or maybe a side effect of resurrection. But it kept getting worse. He started forgetting things. Not memories or instincts. He forgot how to sneeze, how to wag his tail, how to bark. His body moved, but not quite naturally. His voice sounded like a recording. His eyes, always just slightly off-center in photos. He asked Stewie if he brought him back. Again, Stewie said no. He swore he hadn't touched the time machine. He hadn't done anything. But Brian kept having dreams. Black and white visions of himself standing in the middle of Spooner Street, while a dozen versions of him watched from the windows. Some alive, some bloody, some with blank faces. One night he woke up with mud on his paws, dirt under his nails, grass in his teeth. He hadn't left the house, and yet he had. He followed the trail outside. It led him to a small mound behind. The house. Fresh soil. A collar sticking out of the ground. His collar. The one from the day he died. He dug. It wasn't empty. Inside was another Brian. Identical, lifeless, staring up with cloudy eyes. He screamed, but the sound didn't come out right. It echoed in his throat, glitching like broken audio. He confronted the family. No one understood. They looked at him with concern. Peter laughed. Lois hugged him. Chris offered him a treat. But when Meg walked past, she whispered, "You're not him." He tried to run, but his paws left no prints in the snow. He tried to drink, but water wouldn't reflect his face anymore. He tried to sleep, but his dreams now belonged to someone else, a mind that kept opening and never closing, because Brian never came back. Something else did, something built from memory and grief, something wearing his skin like a story being told wrong, and now it doesn't know what it is, only that it was loved once, that it was mourned, that it was missed, and it wants that again, desperately. So it smiles, it drinks, it walks like Brian, it talks like Brian. But if you look into its eyes long enough, you'll know. And by then, it's too late. Because whatever came back, it's looking for a new life. Maybe yours. Story 6, The Meg That Was Erased. There was a time when Meg Griffin was part of every memory. Photos, videos, family dinners, birthdays. But one morning, she was gone. Not missing, not kidnapped, erased. No one in the Griffin house noticed. There were still 4 chairs at the table. Still 5 toothbrushes in the bathroom. Still a closed bedroom door down the hall. But no one opened it. No one asked whose room it was, or why it was always dark, or why the air inside felt heavy. Lois vacuumed around it. Chris never glanced at it. Stewie wheeled past it without pause. Even Brian, sharp as ever, didn't feel like anything was out of place. Because whatever had taken Meg had taken the memory of her too. All except one thing. The mirror in her room. It was cracked. Hairline fractures like spider legs. And in the center of the glass, a handprint, pressed from the inside. That night, Peter walked past her door and paused. Just for a second. He said he felt like he'd forgotten something. Something important. He shrugged and went to bed. But the next morning there was a photo on the fridge that hadn't been there the night before. A family portrait, all smiling, and right in the center, a blurred shape, human-sized, distorted, just out of focus. They didn't notice it, but it noticed them. Later that week, Chris found a notebook in his room with his name written over and over in block letters. No one knew where it came from. Lois began hearing footsteps upstairs while everyone was at dinner. Brian barked at shadows in the hall, and Stewie's toys kept rearranging themselves, always forming a single word. Remember. At first, the family laughed it off. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe Peter was playing tricks again. Maybe the kids were bored. But then the calls started, not on phones, on the baby monitor. Breathing, then a voice. Quiet, fragile. I'm still here. Lois tore through the attic looking for baby monitors. There weren't any up there. Only a single photograph. Meg's 13th birthday. Torn in half, but her face still visible. Smiling, shy, eyes desperate. She screamed. Peter found her the next morning, curled up in Meg's room. She didn't remember why she was crying, just that she'd had a dream of a girl who wanted to come home. That night, every mirror in the house cracked, and Meg's door creaked open for the first time in weeks. Inside was nothing. No bed, no clothes, just walls covered in writing. The same word repeated over and over in red marker. Me. They tried to paint over it, but the words bled back through. Now sometimes at night, the house makes a sound, like a chair scraping, like someone shifting under covers, like breathing, software, steady, right behind the wall. And sometimes the family pauses for just a second, looking at the space between them, wondering if something's missing, something they used to know, used to love, used to avoid, and in that moment, the air goes cold, because Meg is still there, not alive, not dead, just remembered, by the house, by the mirror, by the absence she left behind. And if one day you wake up and your family forgets your name, if your room looks untouched, if no one meets your eyes at dinner, you'll know what happened. You're becoming Meg. Story 7, The Black-Eyed Stewies. No one knows how many versions of Stewie Griffin exist. Some are heroes, some are monsters. Some never left the crib. Others never needed to. But in one collapsing multiverse corridor, something broke, and they came through. It started with a single flash in the sky. No explosion, no thunder, just a rip, a green line across the clouds, jagged, humming. The next morning, Stewie stood in the living room, watching the static on the TV. Unmoving, eyes wide, Lois called his name. He turned, and his eyes were black. Not bruised, not shadowed. Black, glossy, reflective, endless. She blinked, and they were normal again. She told herself she imagined it, until the next day, when another Stewie was seen. In the backyard, then at the end of the hallway, then inside the refrigerator smiling between the milk jugs. But Stewie never said he was going anywhere, never explained the disappearances. And when asked, he just tilted his head, almost amused. Peter thought it was a prank, until he walked into the garage and saw 4 of them, all identical, all silent, all staring at him with those black, empty eyes. He blinked, and they were gone. The house grew colder. Mirrors stopped reflecting. Clocks stopped ticking. And Stewie's voice changed. He began speaking backwards. Not words in reverse. Time in reverse. Describing events before they happened. Finishing sentences no one had started yet. Brian tried confronting him. Stewie just whispered a date. Brian looked it up. It was the day he died. In a timeline that had been erased years ago. One by one, the black-eyed Stewies revealed themselves. 13 of them, appearing across Quahog at night, standing outside houses, staring at windows, tapping on glass, never speaking, never blinking. Just watching. Lois found a note in Stewie's crib. It wasn't written by her Stewie. It was written to him. It said, "You made it out." But we never did. They weren't invaders. They were survivors. Versions of Stewie who had been left behind, abandoned in broken timelines, glitched realities, experimental loops. They had seen the end, over and over, and remembered every version. Now they were looking for the one who escaped it. This Stewie. They wanted to bring him back, to finish what had started, to return him to the spiral. Lois woke up one night to find Stewie standing over her bed. Not her Stewie. She screamed. Peter ran in, but the room was empty. Stewie was in his crib, smiling. The mirror above it was cracked in the center, as if something had pushed through, then pulled back. Now the lights in the house flicker at 3:03 a.m. A baby monitor crackles with voices that aren't Stewie's. And sometimes when you pass by a window, you see yourself holding a child that isn't yours, one with black eyes and a smile that doesn't belong to this world. Stewie no longer talks about the multiverse. He just draws circles on the floor with chalk. 13 of them, connected by lines filled with names no one taught him, because he knows they're coming back, and next time they won't knock. Story 8, Cleveland's Basement. When Cleveland Brown moved back to Quahog, he brought more than just boxes. He brought a house, quiet, clean, fresh paint, manicured lawn, working appliances. But it came with a basement and something inside it. At first it was nothing, just a strange odor, a chill that never matched the thermostat. Cleveland thought it was old pipes. Donna said it was mold. But Rallo? He said the basement was breathing. They laughed. They always laughed, until the drawing started. Rallo began sketching spirals, caverns, stairs that curved forever downward, and in the center of every page, a black figure with no face. He said it lived beneath the floor, and every night it came closer. Cleveland dismissed it as imagination, until he heard it himself. Not footsteps, not rats, a voice, calling softly, patient, repeating a name Cleveland hadn't heard in years. Loretta, his ex-wife, dead and buried. He slammed the door and bolted it shut, but the next morning the lock was on the inside. He swore he hadn't touched it. The family started hearing things too. Donna would find drawers open, toothbrushes wet with cold water no one used. Rallo's toys would go missing, then return exactly where they'd been, but subtly wrong, scratched, bent, rearranged, and every few nights they all had the same dream, a staircase with no end. And something whispering in the dark below. One night, Cleveland caved. He went down. The air was thicker than it should have been. The light bulbs flickered. The temperature dropped. Halfway down, the stairs changed. The wood became stone. The ceiling disappeared. The walls opened into darkness. It wasn't a basement anymore. It was a shaft, a tunnel, a spiral into something older than the house, older than Quahog. He heard breathing behind the walls, software, rhythmic, matching his own heartbeat. The steps went on forever. He turned back, but the door was gone. He was alone. Then the voice returned, clearer, stronger. "You brought me back." Cleveland ran. Somehow he emerged into the kitchen, breathless, sweating, splinters in his hands. The clock said 2 minutes had passed, but his phone said 3 hours, and his shoes were wet with black water. He tried to tell Donna. She didn't believe him, until she heard it too. A knock on the basement door, then another, then a whisper under the floor. "Let me back in." Cleveland boarded it up, sealed it, ignored it. But the house wouldn't let it go. The walls began to peel. Pictures shifted. Voices played on the radio that didn't match the station. They moved out, but they still dream of the basement. And sometimes, when they're near certain shadows or cracks in concrete, they feel the stairs beneath them, still descending, still open, because the basement didn't belong to the house. The house belonged to it, and it's waiting. Story 9. The laugh track. At first it was just a sound, short, sharp, familiar. Laughter, not from the family, not from neighbors, but from somewhere else. It started after dinner. Peter told a joke. Nothing special. Lois rolled her eyes. Chris giggled. And then, A crisp, perfect burst of laughter rang out. Too loud, too timed, as if someone had pressed play. They paused. Peter joked again. Another laugh. Identical. Same length, same tone. No source. It didn't come from the TV, not from the radio, not even from outside. It came from nowhere. At first, they thought it was funny, some kind of glitch. Brian tried to find the cause. He unplugged the electronics, cut the power. Still, the laugh came. Always after something humorous. Always just a second too late. The family grew used to it, until it didn't stop. The laugh began to appear at the wrong times. When Stewie cried, when Lois screamed, when Chris said he was afraid. It no longer cared about jokes. It laughed when things went wrong. Then came the other sounds. Applause. Boos. Gasps. Not real. Synthetic. Like they were living inside a recording. Peter tried ignoring it, but he began to change. He started speaking in punchlines, winking after every sentence, repeating the same jokes he'd said years ago, word for word, like he was remembering a script, and the laughter loved it. Lois begged him to stop. He turned to her and said, "You're not in the pilot." She slept on the couch that night. At 3 a.m., the laugh track woke her up, louder than ever, overlapping itself, layering, like thousands of people were watching. She ran to the living room. The TV was off. The lights were flickering. Peter was standing in the dark, smiling, facing the wall, talking to no one, delivering lines she didn't understand, references to events that never happened, punchlines with no setup, each followed by that same perfect, awful laugh. The next morning, he didn't remember any of it, but the laugh track followed them everywhere, on their phones, in mirrors, even outside. Neighbors began to notice. Quagmire heard it through the fence. Cleveland saw Peter wave to something no one else could see, then laugh for 5 minutes straight. Eventually, Peter stopped speaking like himself. Every word sounded written. Stewie discovered a loop in the timeline. Events repeating, not weekly, but scene by scene. They were trapped in a broadcast, not on television, but in something's perception. They were being watched, judged, consumed, and the laughter wasn't reacting. It was directing. When Peter resisted, when he went off script, the laugh turned into static, high-pitched, screeching. He collapsed to the floor, convulsing. Stewie dragged him into the basement, disconnected every part of the house from any external signal. But the laughter still came. Now it plays even when no one speaks, as if the scene is still happening, somewhere. Sometimes, if they sit in silence, they hear it fade. Only then does the fear sink in. Because if they stop talking, if the scene ends, the episode is over, and whatever's watching might start a new one, with new characters and the old ones erased. Story 10, The Griffin Tape. It started with a box in the attic, unlabeled, dust-covered, heavy in a way that didn't make sense. Chris found it while looking for Halloween decorations. Inside, one VHS tape. No markings, no case. Just the words, Griffin Family Original Cut, written in shaky red ink across the side. The Griffins hadn't owned a VCR in years. But Stewie, curious as always, rebuilt one from spare parts. They slid the tape in. The screen crackled, then faded to black. Then, the intro, not the usual one. No music, no color, just slow zooms of the Griffin house. Still, empty. Each room perfectly clean. Every clock stuck at 4:07. Then the camera moved, not a cut, a movement, like someone was holding it, filming. Lois appeared first, standing in the kitchen, smiling, not moving. Then Peter, reading a newspaper that never turned. Then Chris, frozen mid-laugh. Then Meg, then Stewie, all standing, all smiling, all staring directly into the lens. But their eyes weren't right. Glassy, wet, unblinking. The footage cut again. Now the family was seated at the dinner table, still not moving, still smiling. And behind them, a seventh chair, empty. The camera slowly moved toward it, then cut to black. The screen stayed dark for a full minute. Then, static, screaming, too quick to understand. Each frame flashing an image, dislocated faces, reversed mouths, a house on fire in reverse, a dog with no skin, Meg laughing with teeth that didn't end. Then, silence. The tape ejected itself. No one spoke. Chris looked sick. Lois was crying and didn't know why. Peter sat still for hours staring at the screen. Later that night, Stewie went frame by frame through the footage. He found something. In each scene, tucked just behind a doorway, reflected in mirrors, at the edge of the frame, was someone else. A figure. Too tall, too still, wearing Peter's clothes. But the face didn't match. Stewie enhanced the image and saw something worse. It looked like him, but older. Wrong. As if the person filming had been Stewie all along, but not from this timeline. Not from any timeline. From somewhere deeper. A forgotten draft. A pilot that was rejected. Scrapped. Buried. And yet, still watching. They burned the tape the next morning. The smell never left the house. That night, the TV turned on by itself. The VCR was gone. But the screen showed the house again. Empty. Frozen. Waiting. And the camera. It was still moving. Still recording. Looking for a family to fill the frame again? If you ever see an unmarked tape in your attic, don't play it. Because once you appear in the Griffin tape, you're always in it, even after you're gone. Story 11. Death's Replacement. In Quahog, death is a person, a figure in a black cloak, sarcastic, dry, tired, just doing his job. He'd been part of the world for as long as anyone could remember. Sometimes he came late, sometimes too early, but he always came. Until one day, he didn't. It began with silence. Hospitals where no heartbeat stopped. Accidents where no one died. People staring blankly after fatal wounds. Confused. Alive. The world should have rejoiced, but it didn't. Because the bodies didn't heal. They simply paused. Pain continued. Wounds stayed open. Suffering lingered. And no one could leave. Not even those who begged for it. Then came the fog. A slow-moving mist that blanketed Quahog, soft and colorless, swallowing sound. Inside it, people saw things. Not visions, not hallucinations. Versions of themselves. Dying again and again, every possible way. And standing nearby in each memory, a small boy, dressed in red, holding a teddy bear, smiling, Stewie. But not the Stewie they knew. This one didn't blink. Didn't breathe, didn't speak, just watched. Then death returned. But it wasn't him anymore. It was Stewie. Same cloak, same scythe, but smaller, sharper, colder. He didn't float. He walked, slowly, deliberately, leaving small scorch marks where his feet touched the ground. When asked what happened to the original death, Stewie said only one word: fired. He began collecting souls, not with a swing, but with a whisper. People would stop mid-sentence, eyes go wide, then vanish. No body, no explanation, just absence. And he didn't follow rules. He took the young, the old, the innocent, the cruel. He took things that shouldn't have souls, dolls, books, a memory from Lois that made her forget Chris was ever born. When asked why, Stewie replied, "I'm correcting inefficiencies." Rickety old hospitals became factories of silence, graveyards filled with empty tombstones. And Peter? Peter saw him, waiting at the foot of his bed every night, smiling, counting. Lois tried to stop him. She begged, pleaded. Stewie listened, then handed her a note, a list. Every person she had ever hurt, every mistake, every lie. Every name she had forgotten. It ended with, "Your total is overdue." She screamed, but no sound came out, just laughter. Quiet, echoing, childish laughter that followed her for days. Even Brian began to feel it. He saw paw prints in the snow when he hadn't left the house. He saw his reflection blink at the wrong time. He dreamed of a leash tightening around his neck, and no one holding the other end. And in the fog, he saw Stewie, always smiling, always waiting, because this Stewie wasn't just replacing death, he was perfecting it, removing the emotion, removing the guilt, removing the waiting. When he points to you, it's over. No arguments, no negotiation, no second chances, just a blink, and the world forgets you were ever there. Story 12, The Chicken That Wouldn't Die. It always started the same way. Peter Griffin, a normal day, a strange envelope, a chicken, then violence, explosions, broken bones, buildings crumbling. The fight went on until one of them fell. Usually, the chicken. And then everything went back to normal. Until the next time. People laughed, called it absurd, a running joke. But Peter knew something was wrong, because every time he woke up after one of those fights, he was missing something. At first it was small, a scar he used to have, gone, a childhood memory, blank. Then a song he loved, vanished from existence. No one else remembered it, not the tune, not the artist, not the genre. It was like reality had rewritten itself, just a little. Then came the cracks. He began seeing versions of himself, flickering at the edges of mirrors, bruised in places he hadn't been hurt yet. Sometimes they whispered warnings. Sometimes they bled. He tried avoiding the chicken, left town, burned letters, destroyed any trace of the feud. But the chicken found him. It always found him. Because it wasn't a chicken anymore. Not really. It had become an anchor, a multiversal constant. Every timeline had one. Every Peter had fought it. Some had lost. Some had won. But none had escaped it. The fight was a ritual, a loop, a punishment. For what? Peter didn't know, until he went too far. One fight ended in a dark, burned-out warehouse. Peter stood victorious, chest heaving. The chicken lay still. And then it spoke. Not with words, with thought, images, visions, worlds collapsing, children screaming, a version of Peter standing over a pile of corpses, laughing as cities burned. Peter screamed, but not in pain, in recognition, because the chicken had been there from the beginning, created not to torment him, but to contain him. Every fight was a reset, a way to keep that Peter buried, to bleed off the darkness inside. And now that it was dead, that version was waking up. He began remembering things he never did, but could have, would have, did in another life. He looked at his hands and didn't know if the blood was real or imagined. Lois found him one morning standing in the yard, the grass beneath him scorched, feathers falling from the sky cracked. Behind it, fire. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. And when she asked him what happened, he turned to her and said, "I think I won." The next day, Peter vanished. But the fights didn't stop. They just moved. Now in cities no one remembers, ruins no one built, you can still hear them. Peter and the chicken, fighting, screaming, resetting the world with every blow. And if you ever see a feather drift down from a sky that shouldn't be breaking, run, because the chicken may have lost, but the thing it was holding back is finally loose. Story 13, Lois in the Static. It began when the cable box glitched. Lois was doing laundry, a normal day. The TV flickered once, then again. She glanced up, static, not loud, not harsh, just there. She grabbed the remote. Nothing changed. She leaned closer, and the static shifted. Only for a second, but enough to see it. A face, pressed against the screen, mouth open, eyes wide, moving, but in reverse. Then gone. She laughed it off, told Peter, told Brian. They shrugged. Old TV, who cares? But that night Lois woke to the sound of the dryer running. She hadn't turned it on. Inside, clothes she didn't recognize. Uniforms, dresses, baby onesies, each one tagged with her name. The next morning, she turned the TV on again. The static returned, and this time, it said her name. Not loudly, not clearly, just hidden under the buzz. A whisper threaded between frequencies. Lois! She called the cable company. They said she'd never had service, that her house wasn't even in their system. Lois checked old bills. They were blank, the envelopes empty. Just her name, repeated over and over. She tried a different channel. The static remained, but now behind it, images flickered. Not shows, her, in places she didn't remember being. Laughing with people she didn't recognize. Holding a baby that wasn't Stewie. Wearing clothes she'd never owned. Some scenes were decades old. Others looked like they hadn't happened yet. One clip showed her screaming into a mirror. The reflection wasn't screaming back. That night the power went out. Lois lit a candle, sat alone in the living room, and the TV turned on by itself. No power, no signal, just static. And then, the voice. We're still here, Lois. The images came faster now. Versions of her in hospitals, in fire, on stages, alone. Hundreds of versions. Some crying, some silent, some staring directly at her through the screen. Then one exactly like her, smiled and waved. Lois dropped the candle. The room lit up in flames. The static didn't stop. In the days after the fire, no one could explain how the TV survived. Untouched, still warm, still on. And Lois? She doesn't talk about it, but she doesn't use mirrors anymore. She walks slower, talks quieter, and sometimes when the house is silent, the others hear the TV buzz, even when it's off. Just for a moment, a flicker of white and gray in the reflection of her eyes. And if you listen carefully, you might hear a voice underneath it all. There are more of me than you think. Because Lois never left the static. She just learned how to live with it. Story 14. Brian's typewriter. Brian Griffin was struggling. Writer's block, rejection emails, half-finished manuscripts on every device he owned. He needed inspiration. Something real. Something raw. That's when he found the typewriter at a flea market. Old, heavy, ivory keys yellowed with age. The vendor didn't speak, just handed it over for $5 and a wink. Brian brought it home. It worked perfectly. No jams, no dust, smooth as silk. That night he wrote for 6 hours straight. When he finally stopped, his paws ached, and in front of him, 30 pages of horror. It was unlike anything he'd ever written. Violent, beautiful, unforgiving. He didn't remember writing any of it, but it read like a confession. He titled it Chapter 1. The next morning, Lois was pale. Someone had broken into a house 3 streets over. No theft, no motive, just blood, painted symbols. A family torn apart, exactly as Brian had written. He said nothing, told himself it was coincidence, until he wrote again. This time, about a car crash. The next morning, Quagmire was hospitalized. The exact model, same intersection, same final words. Brian locked the typewriter in the closet, but it kept typing. He'd wake up to new pages, descriptions of scenes that hadn't happened yet, dialogues with no context, names of people he hadn't met. Then one night, it typed his own name, followed by, wakes up to scratching under the floorboards. He heard it an hour later. Stewie found him the next morning, sitting at the desk, shaking. The paper was blank. The typewriter was cold, but his paws were covered in ink. Except it wasn't ink, it was red. Brian tried burning the machine. It didn't catch fire, didn't even warm. He tried burying it. The next morning it was on his pillow, waiting, and it had written more. Not predictions anymore, commands. You will write at midnight. You will not stop. You will give us your voice. He started speaking in sentences that weren't his, repeating phrases he'd never heard before, describing things no one else could see. The town changed. Shadows stretched longer. People avoided eye contact. Dogs barked at nothing, then stopped forever. The typewriter kept going, feeding, not on stories, on him, his thoughts, his choices, his soul. He tried to warn Lois. She read one line from the page. and collapsed, screaming. Eyes rolled back. She forgot her own name for 2 days. Now Brian no longer speaks. He just writes, page after page. Even when he sleeps, his paws move, and the typewriter never runs out of paper, because it doesn't need any. It writes on time, it writes on air, it writes on us. And one day soon, you'll hear a knock at your door. You'll find a single page on the ground, with your name on it, and whatever's written will happen. Story 15, Chris in the Mirror School. Chris. Griffin hated school. The halls, the noise, the blank stares of teachers who barely remembered his name. But one day that changed. He came home quiet. Too quiet. When Lois asked how school went, he blinked slowly and said, "It was better today." They opened the mirrors. They thought it was a joke, until he stopped taking the bus, started leaving at night, coming home just before sunrise, clothes clean, shoes dry, but never remembering what he learned, only that the mirrors had names now. Brian followed him once, watched Chris walk into the schoolyard at 3:33 a.m. No lights, no cars, just Chris in his reflection. And then they separated. His reflection moved first, turned, opened a door on the wall where no door had ever been. Chris followed it inside. Brian never saw him come out. But the next morning, Chris was in his room, smiling, sitting up straight, books open, writing symbols that weren't letters. When Lois looked at the notebook, the ink shifted, as if trying to escape her eyes. That night, Chris asked if they had any broken mirrors. He wanted to relearn the shapes. No one slept. The next day, Peter caught him staring into the bathroom mirror, mouthing something. When Peter looked in and the reflection blinked out of sync, then grinned. Chris didn't. He hadn't moved. Stewie set up a camera, filmed Chris asleep. At 2:42 a.m., he sat up, walked to the mirror, pressed his hand to the glass, and stepped inside. Disappeared. 6 hours later, he walked back out, but not from the same mirror, from the one in the living room. No footsteps, no sound, just arrival. The footage glitched. The timestamp rewrote itself. Static bloomed in the corners of the screen. When Stewie asked him where he went, Chris said, "We had ethics today." I passed. The next week, 3 students went missing. Chris didn't seem surprised. He just whispered their names in his sleep. One of them appeared inside a mirror 2 towns over. Frozen, mouth open in a scream, hands pressed against the inside of the glass. No one could get him out. Now Chris avoids mirrors in daylight, but at night, he talks to them, gives them answers, recites equations, draws floor plans to buildings that don't exist. Sometimes he forgets where he is, says things like, "Lunch in room 13. Don't look at her hands. The principal is made of bone now." One morning, Lois found a new mirror in the attic. It wasn't hers. They'd never owned it. And in the corner of the glass was a doorway, just big enough for one child to walk through. She smashed it. It bled. Now the Griffins cover every mirror in the house at night, but sometimes they still hear voices behind the curtains, teaching, correcting, calling roll. And if you ever wake up and see your reflection watching you before you move, you may already be enrolled. Story 16, The Vacuum of Spooner Street. It started at the edge of the block. The house at 432 Spooner Street vanished overnight. Not burned, not demolished, just gone. No rubble, no foundation, no records. One day it existed. The next, nothing. The strangest part? No one could remember who lived there. Neighbors stuttered when asked. Mail was still delivered, but the envelopes were blank. Even Google Maps showed a glitch, a gray smear where the house should have been. Lois brought it up at dinner. Peter laughed. "There was never a house there, Lois. That's just dirt." But she remembered a birthday party, a dog barking from the yard, a woman named Carol with a high laugh and sad eyes. She drove past again. The lot was still there, but bigger. The grass around it wilted. The sidewalk cracked. Even the streetlights leaned away. 2 days later, the next house was gone. The Wilkins. Then the McMillans. No one remembered them either, only Lois. She started drawing maps, writing down names, documenting every neighbor, taking photos, but the photos came back blank. Every image of Spooner Street now had a blur at the edges, spreading inward. One night, Stewie stood in the backyard and said, "It's hungry." No one knew what he meant until the shadows started moving, not flickering, shifting, as if the absence were spreading, like a slow breath inhaling the neighborhood. Chris said he dreamed of a void, a great mouth beneath the pavement, black, endless, pulling gently, not to kill, but to forget. Peter vanished first, not physically and not yet, but from memory. Lois woke up and saw an empty seat at the table. Didn't think twice. His photos were gone. His name erased from her phone. Even Stewie just shrugged when asked. "Peter who?" Lois screamed. But the world didn't care. It was already forgetting her too. She stood outside the house and watched the block shrink. Street by street, light by light. Everything pulled inward. Not with force, but with certainty. A vacuum. Not of air, but of existence. The next morning their mailbox was gone. Then the sidewalk. Then the number on the house. Brian sat on the porch and wept. No one remembered why. Just that something was missing. And then, so was he. Now only Lois remains, standing at the edge of what's left, whispering names, holding drawings that no longer mean anything. She doesn't know how long she's been there, but she can feel it now. The pull, software, patient, final. If you ever drive through Rhode Island and take a wrong turn, you might pass a place that doesn't appear on any map, where the air feels too still, and you forget what you were talking about. That's Spooner Street, or what's left of it. And if you hear your name whispered from nothing at all, don't answer, because the vacuum is always listening. Story 17, Stewie's Time. Anchor. Stewie Griffin had grown tired of time travel, tired of paradoxes, of resetting events, of versions of himself he no longer recognized. So he decided to do something no version of him had ever attempted. He would stop time from touching him. He called it the time anchor, a device not to move through time, but to separate from it, to make himself constant, unchanging, unmoving, unbreakable by history. He activated it during a thunderstorm, lightning, silence. Then something shifted. At first, nothing seemed different. He still breathed, still thought, still existed. But the world when a year had slowed, not visibly, but emotionally. People felt off, voices dragged, laughter came late, like a track buffering. And Stewie, he no longer aged. Days passed, then weeks. His hair didn't grow. His heartbeat never changed. He stopped blinking. Lois noticed first. She called it new baby energy. But Brian watched closely. He saw the air around Stewie bend, light pooling unnaturally near his body, shadows refusing to touch him. Then came the echoes. Stewie began appearing in places he hadn't walked to. One moment in the living room, the next, in the backyard staring into the sky. No footsteps, no sound, just presence. Sometimes he spoke before people finished their sentences. Sometimes he didn't speak at all, but they still understood. He was untethered now, not ahead, not behind, just apart. And it was killing him, not quickly, but existentially, because time wasn't leaving him alone. It was pushing back. Reality cracked around him. Mirrors showed older versions of Stewie, bitter, bloated, monstrous. Reflections whispered regrets he hadn't made yet. And in the corner of his lab, a door appeared. He didn't build it. He didn't open it. But it leaked static, and the sound of ticking that got slower every day. One morning, Stewie walked into the kitchen and Lois dropped her glass. Because for a second, he was all of them. Every Stewie. Hundreds flickering in and out of phase, screaming, laughing, begging, then gone. The anchor was unraveling, and with it, every possible version of him. Some weren't human, some weren't sane, some weren't alive, and now they were all inside him. He tried to shut it down, But the anchor wouldn't allow it, because it wasn't a device anymore. It had become a constant, a law, a truth. Time no longer included Stewie, which meant he couldn't be undone, couldn't be saved, or erased, or mourned. He was now a fixed point, a wound in time that could never heal. Now he stands in his crib most nights, motionless, staring at a wall that isn't a wall. Sometimes he talks to it. Sometimes he disappears for hours. When he returns, he's quieter. And each time a different part of the world is changed. A word missing from the dictionary. A constellation gone. A familiar face with no memory of their own life. Because Stewie Griffin no longer lives in time. He just visits. And one day, when he stops visiting, we may not remember he was ever here at all. Story 18, Peter's Laughter Disease. It began with a wheeze, just a strange cough in Peter's throat after dinner. Then a chuckle, then a full wheezing belly laugh. Lois rolled her eyes, another Peter moment, but it didn't stop. He laughed through the night, at nothing, at everything, even in his sleep. By morning, his voice was raw, his ribs sore, but he kept laughing. At breakfast, he spilled milk on himself and screamed with joy, slipped on a napkin, hysterical, stubbed his toe and collapsed in howling delight. Chris laughed with him, then Meg, then Brian, until Brian started bleeding from the nose and still laughed. Stewie ran diagnostics on Peter's brain. There was no tumor, no chemical imbalance, no anomaly at all, except one, a signal, faint, repeating, a frequency. Too low for ears, too deep for the body. But the brain heard it loud and clear, and it translated it as joy. Not real joy, forced joy. Manufactured, pumped into neurons, tied to muscle twitches and emotional triggers. Peter was infected, not with a virus, but with laughter itself. The town noticed. People who interacted with Peter began to laugh too. Doctors, shopkeepers, mailmen. They laughed at funerals, laughed during traffic accidents, laughed while crying. It spread like fog, slowly, invisibly, and every time it touched someone, they stopped making sense. They stopped grieving, stopped worrying, stopped thinking, just laughed. Even as their bodies shut down, Lois tied Peter to a chair, begged him to stop. He smiled, bloody gums, swollen cheeks, and whispered, "It's not a joke anymore, Lois. It's the truth." Then he burst into giggles so violent his shoulder dislocated, but he kept laughing. Stewie tracked the signal to a location outside town. A crater, empty, burned at the center. A speaker, not plugged in, not attached to anything, just humming. The laughter bled from it like fog. He destroyed it, or tried to. It didn't break, didn't burn. It just laughed with him, through him. He screamed, and the scream echoed. Back his laughter, because the signal had already moved. It wasn't in the device. It was in the air. Peter's body gave out a week later, collapsed mid-joke, but he didn't stop laughing. Even in the morgue, his chest twitched. His mouth grinned. The sound echoed faintly from his lungs. Lois buried him deep. No headstone, no name. But sometimes people walking past the plot swear they hear it. A single drawn-out laugh, like someone remembering something funny they'll never be able to explain. And now the town is quieter, but not better, because they're all waiting for it to start again. And when it does, there won't be anything left but laughter. Story 19. Lois, the dream architect. Lois Griffin had a dream. She was standing in the living room. The house was silent. Outside, snow fell upward. Inside, the walls breathed. She turned to speak, but no one had a face. Not Peter, not Chris, not even Stewie. Just blank skin where identity should be. She woke with a gasp. But something was wrong. The photos in the hallway were different. Same events, same outfits. But the faces had changed. Peter had blue eyes. Meg had black hair. Chris had no eyes at all. She blinked. The images corrected themselves. She told no one. That night, the dream returned. This time she built a kitchen, a perfect replica of theirs. She chose the color of the walls, the sound of the fridge, even the texture of the countertops. When she touched the floor, it rippled. The next day, the real kitchen matched it. Same paint, same hum, same scratch she'd placed near the oven in her dream. She thought she was imagining it until she tested it. She dreamed of a crack in the foundation. Woke up. It was there. She dreamed of a second bathroom. Behind the closet, it appeared. No construction, no labor, just will. And it listened. She was dreaming reality. Each night she built more. Small things at first, then changes in people. Peter stopped drinking. Brian wrote a best-selling novel. Meg smiled more often. The world became peaceful, predictable, perfect. But perfection has a price. One night she saw a door. She hadn't designed it, hadn't placed it. It stood at the end of a hallway that didn't exist during the day. Inside it was pitch black, except for a voice. "You didn't make me, Lois, but I've always been here." She tried to wake up, but she didn't. Days passed. In the dream, birthdays, holidays, the seasons changed, but she never woke. She asked Stewie to help. He laughed and said, "We've never left, Mother. You just finally caught up." The family started glitching. Peter repeated phrases mid-conversation. Chris blinked and reset. Stewie floated 2 inches above the floor and rotated slightly when he spoke. Lois screamed. The house melted, then reformed. Now she's not sure what's real. Sometimes she dreams that she's waking up. Other times she wakes up and finds herself in another version of the house, slightly off. The angle's wrong, the shadows too long, the laughter too timed, and in every version, the door is still there, waiting. Because Lois isn't dreaming anymore. She's remembering that this has happened before, that she's rebuilt her life 1,000 times. From scratch, from trauma, from denial, and behind that door is the first version, the original dream, the one where everything went wrong, the one she sealed away. But now it's waking up, and if she opens that door again, everything she built will remember her, and it will want to come back. Story 20, The Griffin Dollhouse. The package arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, no note, just a cardboard box, sealed tight. Inside was a dollhouse, an exact replica of the Griffin home, room by room, object by object. Perfect, too perfect. Even the smallest details were right. The scuff on the coffee table, the chip in Lois's favorite mug, the burn mark on the stove Peter still swore he didn't cause. Stewie stared at it for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just whispered, "I didn't build this." That night, Meg saw something move inside it. Just a flicker, a shadow in the upstairs hallway. She laughed it off, until the next night, when her bedroom light turned on in the dollhouse. Then off. Then on again, at the exact moment she flipped the real switch. Lois noticed next. A picture on the wall had fallen. She found the same picture tilted inside the dollhouse. When she adjusted it in real life, the miniature version moved on its own, snapping into place without a touch. Stewie ran tests. It wasn't mechanical, no electronics, no motors, but it was active. And then the real horror began. Brian walked past the living room window in the dollhouse. His figure, his exact walk. A perfect replica, but he wasn't near it. Peter saw himself sitting at the kitchen table, drinking beer, talking to no one. But in the real kitchen, he was still upstairs. The dollhouse was no longer copying them. It was running parallel. Then it started predicting things. Lois tripped on the stairs, seconds after her doll fell. Meg's bedroom caught fire in the miniature, and the real smoke alarm went off an hour later. And worse, sometimes they saw extra figures, versions of themselves that didn't match. Peter, but skinnier. Lois, but with no eyes. Stewie, taller and smiling far too wide. They moved independently. They stood in the attic. sat on the roof. Watch the rest of the dolls, and by extension, them. The family agreed to destroy it. Peter smashed it with a hammer. Wood splintered, paint cracked, but the next morning it was back, pristine, centered on the table, and this time the front door was open. Inside, the doll family was gone. Empty chairs, empty beds. But as they stared, their real house creaked. Footsteps above them, running water, laughter. Stewie checked the cameras. There was no one there, until the playback showed them, the dolls, walking through the real house, smiling, sitting, replacing. Lois screamed when she looked in the mirror and saw her reflection blink. Early. Now the dollhouse sits untouched, but it's never empty. Sometimes when it's quiet, they see their other selves walking across the rooms, doing things they haven't done yet, or would never do, or already did, but forgot. And if you ever visit the Griffin home, you'll notice they never go near the table where the dollhouse sits. They never clean it, never open it, never speak of it, but they always glance at it, nervously, quietly, because deep down they wonder, are we watching it? Or, is it still watching us?